You're listening to Chem Stories, a podcast series created by people with lived experience of P&P chemsex.
Well, hello, my beautiful people. This is Captain Patrice welcoming you aboard Chem Stories Airlines for our YYZ Sagacity flight. On this first Toronto departure, Investigator Olivier introduces experienced flyer Bradley. Our flight plan forecasts discussions on his personal journey and perspectives on P&P chemsex in Toronto, the Queen City, also known by some as the City of Queens. We'll be on their way shortly, so please make sure to keep your hearts and minds open at all times. Keep your prejudices securely stowed, as this flight is a judgment-free zone, and prepare for takeoff. Should you experience turbulence while listening to this podcast, please visit our list of resources and services related to P&P chemsex in the episode description and on chemstories.ca. Thank you for choosing Chem Stories Airlines, where the journey is always a trip.
Hi, I'm Olivier and I'm on a mission to learn about the lived experience of people who have chemsex. And this is part of the Chem Stories series podcast. And today I'm with Bradley. Hi, Bradley.
Hi, Olivier. It's Olivier. For all of those times when we first met, I kept calling you Oliver to my embarrassment, to my Anglo embarrassment. No one corrected me until I heard Patrice. I actually heard him say Olivier, and I was like, oh, damn it.
You know,
So
my mother-in-law called me Olivia for the longest time, so I'll take whatever. So I have multiple names.
Olivia. Well, if I call you Olivia, you can call me Barbara, so we're fine.
Okay. Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. How are you?
I'm great. And I don't say that lightly. I like where I am right now and what I'm working on and what I'm doing, and it brings me a lot of joy, actually. The stuff that I'm working on, which is this project, but also what I'm working on at school right now is satisfying to me.
Why is this project bringing you joy?
Because I think in a lot of the research that is done on chemsex, lived experiences aren't centered the way that you're centering them or the way that we're centering them. They're centered in a way that takes the story and will pathologize it or will frame it in sort of a medical model or a criminalization model. And the idea of podcast as methodology, I think, is so great because it allows people to make meaning in their own time and in their own space. And that it's not people making meaning out of the meaning that you made, it's people making meaning in their own way, which I think it's exciting. And I hope that this is a trend that we're moving more in this direction. Even when I listen to the podcasts over and over again, I sort of take out different or glean different things from what people are saying. I think there's a real opportunity in there for longevity, and we all have that capacity of making meaning as human beings.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is exactly why we wanted to do this project because, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about chemsex, but often, you know, we hear the point of view of like researcher or like healthcare providers, but, you know, we don't hear often the experience of people who do chemsex or have done chemsex. I think it's critical if we want to learn about this experience. And I understand, I don't know if you'll agree with me. And, you know, I think it's probably difficult to talk about this experience in many cases because it remains highly stigmatized and very taboo. Do you think it's the case? I see you nodding for people who will be listening.
My eyes got bigger and I started nodding. It is stigmatized. I think we create these borders around in communities because I'm gay and I'm in the larger gay community, but also then in all of the sub-gay communities that we have. But I think we create borders around drug use and that there are certain people who will think, oh, I do MDMA, so I'm a good gay and I don't smoke meth. I don't have a bowl pipe. And I don't slam and I don't do, and then within the community of gay men or men who have sex with men who use meth or have chemsex, there is different borders around that too. And I think that if you smoke it or sniff it, there's a certain acceptability around it. But if you inject it, I think that the stigma goes even further around that. Because I think it sort of, not enacts, but it sort of invokes a lot of people's fear around needles and drug use. And with chemsex, the stigma, it also invokes men having sex with men for pleasure. And I think that our world is still not fond of the homosexual, you know?
What's your hope for this project for Chem Stories?
My hope. Well, I used to be cranky around the word hope because I used to think hope is not a plan and hope is about control. It's not to get too Foucault on it, but that hope is about getting people comfortable with mediocrity and having no control and all of that sort of stuff. And then I heard someone else, an author, talking about hope in a different way that, and I thought it doesn't always have to be so straightforward, like and linear in a way that hope can actually be, it can actually be positive as well. And so my hope around the project is it comes from the idea that we push against stigma by telling stories. And instead of the paradigm around fighting stigma in a sort of negative, combative way, that we do it slowly with intention around like the whole idea of telling one story at a time. And that by doing that, we're actually changing that dominant narrative around
Mhm.
the war on drugs and the war on men having sex with men and all of those wars. And instead of fighting war with war, we just get to simply do the work one story at a time and make difference because you do see the difference happening. We heard it in the podcast as well,
Mm-hmm.
where
I mean,
people,
stories are so powerful.
and they're the
Yeah.
best, right? Like it's how I learn, and it's also where I get the most engaged in stuff
Mm.
if someone is sharing a story. And that's why I also think podcast as methodology is so powerful because we're actually listening to stories and then get to make our meaning of them however we like.
And what's your personal connection to chemsex?
My personal connection to chemsex is, well, I grew up around drugs. My mom did drugs because she was 60s flower child, I guess. But I never saw problematic use, right? She
Mm.
would use drugs and we'd always have conversations around it. And so my connection to chemsex is I've always seen it as part of community. I saw it as part of my community with my mom. I didn't do drugs until I was in my 20s. And I think part of that is because there was no sort of like border around it, around don't touch it, don't do it. And so it wasn't a thing. And I would talk to my mom about certain drugs and what the high was like and stuff. And some drugs don't appeal to me at all. Like hallucinating, not interested. I don't need to hallucinate any more than I already do in my normal life. But stuff that gives you energy, sign me up. And then I started reading research around men having sex with men and using psychoactive drugs and using drugs and how it sort of got framed. And I never saw myself in that research, like similar to what you said about
Mm.
not seeing community. And one of my favorite people in the world was Toni Morrison. And she said, if you don't see yourself in what you're reading, write your own story. So I think that is the core of my relationship to chemsex is telling my own story around that and also hopefully helping others to do the same.
Mm. How would you define your own personal definition of chemsex?
How would I define? And I think that my definition is in no way should it be universal. I think it's my definition. And it involves methamphetamine and G. Oh, I want it to be all fancy and actually say what GBL and GHB stand for, but I think I can't right now because of the pressure. I'll just scream it out at some point. But it's those drugs. I know for other people, it involves ketamine and it involves other drugs, but I don't need people to look like cartoons, so I'm not interested in ketamine. So for me, it's different than sexualized drug use because chemsex, it's specific to connection and ceremony and finding people that are similar that have that, where you go on a trip together, like a
A sexual.
meaningful, yeah, a sexual trip together. And sex in a way that is sort of outside of a heteronormative understanding of sex that is sort of like steeped in Valentine's Day and monogamy, but it's about sex as social activity, which I think is very queer because a lot of that is unspoken. A lot of what we get from sex is unspoken. And that is where the safety is because I think there's this line in chemsex around naming it too much and not naming it, because I think not naming it is how it stays queer, and naming it makes it
Mm.
very mainstream, because the straights are always stealing things from us. So I try not to steal, and I try to just name it when the straights are stealing. The very idea that straight men now do manscaping is full theft. It's 100% theft. So yeah.
And there's a lot of concerns about chemsex. Like, I mean, there's concerns being voiced, and sometimes in very unhealthy and unhelpful way. Like, I just remember like reading a headline like chemsex a horror story, or like, worse than the AIDS epidemic, those kind of things. Is there concerns that we should have around this from your
Yeah,
point of view?
I think there are concerns, but first, how are they spelling whore? And like, is it possessive, a whore's story? Then I'd be interested in reading it. I think there is this thing that I notice around analysis in general around chemsex, and that is that we don't name heterosexism. And when we don't name it, we don't have to then unpack it or deal with it. And then people that get heterosexist privilege, which I think you can be gay and still get heterosexual privilege by being homonormative, right? Like just, picket fence, adopting a kid, marriage, all of that stuff. And then really, really digging into the idea of what a good gay is, and then making sure that you don't associate with the bad gays. So the idea of the privilege that comes with heterosexism, I think, is the concern around chemsex. And so it's not really about the sex that men who have chemsex have. It's about how it gets used to prop up a normative life for other people, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And you're also a student now.
I am.
And you are researching chemsex. Do you want to tell us about this?
I do. I went back to school as a mature student, and I like to remind everyone that a mature student at university is somebody over 30. So I just barely make the criteria if you times it by 2. But in the undergrad that I did a Bachelor of Social Work. I got an award, Flick Hair, and I did research and I just looked at what can be learned from the stories of men who engage in chemsex. And it was just really an exercise in centering those stories and what can we learn from that. And it was then informed the research that I'm now doing in my graduate studies, where I'm centering the stories of men who engage in slam sex, which is some people refer to as actual sexual preference, and some people refer to it as sex. And when you are having sex, the way that the chem part plays in is that you're injecting it rather than smoking it or sniffing it or putting it up your shooter or however you're doing it, but it's actual IV injection. So, and because that is such a stigmatized community, I wanted to push against those narratives and center men who engage in slam sex as a place of knowledge and not as a place of HIV transmission and STI, flourishing and lack of ethics and morals, but actually look and have discussions with men who engage in slam sex around how is care practiced? How do community members take care of each other? And how is that taken up? How is care practiced and taken up within those communities? So that's my research.
Yeah, because I think that's something we don't really put forward often. It's the care that's happening in chemsex communities.
Yeah.
It's not just, come on, raw sex and so on, right?
Yeah. Taken loads, third stall from the left. It's, there's other stories around chemsex as well. In the undergrad research that I did, there was a story that one of the participants shared around the first time that he injected. And what he described is so caring and loving that it actually lit a light in my brain that I think has been a huge influence in why I am now doing the research and how I'm doing it now too. And I don't think that I'm a monster, but even I had this idea around injection that needed to be challenged. And I think like I said, I don't think I'm an asshole about that. Like if I hook up with someone and they tell me that they slam, I ask them to wait until I get there as a safety precaution and to do it in front of me and all of that, if that is their comfort, just for safety and care. And so even having that perspective, hearing someone talk about the injection practice in slam sex as a type of care and as a type of self-care and community care, I was like, wow, this is great. I need to lean into that because I think there's a lot to learn there. Just even about how we treat each other as queer people.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. I think that's going to be very exciting to see what's going to come out of your research.
It also is politicizing for people when they find out the research that I'm doing because they didn't know, one, that I use drugs, even though I talk about it all the time, but they don't see me in how they see a drug user, right? Because I have teeth and my nose isn't black on the end. And, they don't see me laying on mattresses on sidewalk and all of this sort of these stigmatizing negative ideas, which sort of take the humanity away from people.
Mm-hmm.
And a few friends, our friendship has changed because of the research.
Oh, yeah? In which way?
Like, I don't have to worry about texting them anymore because they don't respond,
Mm.
which I laugh about because I think everything is timely. Like life, like things are temporary. And if this was the test of our friendship and it didn't pass this test, that's okay. One of them spoke to my really, really good friends about my research and being known as a drug user and doing this research. And they called this special meeting for me. And they're like, Brad, we're concerned. And I was like, oh, I see where this is going. And I'm going to be not that friendly about it. And they were like, so we have some concerns. And I was like, yeah, what are they? They're like, well, your drug use. And I went, ah, in comparison to yours or just mine in a vacuum?
Mm.
Well, and so we had this great big, it's long dialogue around drug use. And it was a great example of how people get othered by those narratives and usually motivated by something else, not motivated by my health, right? And in my using in a way that is impacting my heart rate and stuff. It's motivated by whose partner finds me more interesting and then some jealousy stuff around that. And so it's not necessarily always about chemsec. It's about, like I said, how we treat each other in the community. And so some of my relationships too, in particular, fell apart.
Mm.
But I think that that's okay because I don't need to hang around with someone who's always asking me if I'm sober, right?
Mm.
It's like, what? Sober? What kind of language is that? So, yeah.
Or, I'm a bit new to the topic of chemsex, but I've been kind of doing some work and talking with people with experience. And I heard this story often of people feeling kind of a disconnect where they kind of feel like because of their drug use, they will kind of either self-distance intentionally from their friends or their friends will just kind of
Oh, that's interesting.
withdraw.
Self-distance. That's an interesting action. I think that actually could be framed as self-care. Self-distancing.
Yeah, maybe.
That's an interesting phrase for behavior. Because I think as a gay man, and I know that I witness in other friends of mine who are gay or queer men, that we do that a lot, that we know there's unspoken things that we pick up all the time. And
Mhm.
and that we don't necessarily need to have great big long discussions about it because there is an unspoken knowing that we then have. And then we go, oh, this is right. And then there's like the normative thinkers that go, oh no, you need to talk about it. You need to, but we don't need to talk about things. If gay men needed to talk about things, no one would ever hook up in a park, right? Because
Mhm.
that is not how it works. There's an unspoken knowing, and language isn't always our friend.
Yeah. Is there a misconception about chemsex that you hope this podcast can challenge?
Is there a misconception? I think there's a ton of misconceptions about chemsex. I think that it's one experience, right? That chemsex is one thing, that it isn't actually others. And like everything, which I think we're learning from a generation of people now, that we can't define things for other people. People get to define things for themselves. Much as we hate it or love it, right? Someone gets to say, that's not my definition of chemsex. And just like I don't want someone to say
Hmm.
how I define chemsex, that, I've been sniffing too much glue and I don't know what I'm talking about, that we get to come together and have these rich dialogues around what chemsex is and lean into the complexity rather than trying to be derivative of it and come up with universal understandings of it. God, that was pretty good, hey?
That was very good. I'm impressed, Bradley.
The caffeine finally kicked in. That's nice. I'm curious, from your perspective, how would you answer that?
That's interesting, the question that you're asking me. I think for having talked about with people with lived experience, and people who have chemsex, I think there's a sentiment that, it's not a community. And I think, there are people that are feeling isolated within the chemsex community, but a lot of people are finding connection and they're finding care. And I think that's one of the misconceptions. And also, chemsex is not a stupid thing done by stupid people. And I'm using very harsh words because I think people are often using harsh words when they're
Yeah.
talking about. And I think people are doing this because it's bringing often something meaningful for them at this period of time, and maybe that will change. And that doesn't mean there's no danger. But I think also people are very deeply aware of the impact of chemsex can have on their life. And I've been very impressed often when I've done on some research projects and in discussion I've had with people with chemsex, with their level of introspection. And I remember talking with one person and I was like, he had insight about his own experience. So I think people are aware of the danger. They are aware of the impacts that it can have or that it has on their life. And I think many people who chemsex that I've had discussion with are able of introspection and have a perspective on their life that is very complex. So I think this is maybe one misconception, that it's not, just naive. I don't see the negative impact that it can have. So I think, maybe perhaps this is one of the misconceptions that people will
Absolutely.
have. And it's not like super dramatic, that there are beautiful moments also that people will often share also about their experience.
That's really interesting because I think how I understand that is that, which should totally be on a t-shirt for Chem Stories, the whole thing about it being stupid, that in that simple language that we hear, in that's what generates the oppression and the stigma.
Mm-hmm.
It
And
just
I think,
exacerbates it.
when we think about drug use, we are really conditioned, in our society to think that drug use is something that someone who doesn't like himself and is not able to reflect about the potential impact will do. We're learning very quickly that this is something stupid, So it's normal to associate that it's just stupid people that will do that will do drugs, I think, in our society. And we're very quick to judge, when people have experience that are confronting to us or that are different than what are our aspiration. And we're very, very quick to judge others, unfortunately, and we all do it. Like,
We don't, but other people do.
Yeah, gays are
Gays
really
never judge,
not quick to
especially
judge.
what someone's wearing. We never judge what they're wearing.
But we're very quick to judge. And I think people also, the other misconception is like for people who have never touched drugs or have never done chemsex, I think they will realize they have way more in common with people that do chemsex than they
That'd be
think.
nice. I think that'll be so nice.
Yeah.
If that, because I think that will happen. I think a lot of things will happen when people listen to it. But if that becomes a really common experience of the shift that happens, I'll nominate you for the Victoria Cross.
Attention all passengers, Captain Patrice speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude. We're now approaching the second and final leg of our YYZ Sagacity flight, where Investigator Olivier resumes the conversation with Bradley as they explore Toronto-specific aspects of the local party community. More compelling stories await. Subscribe to stay updated. If you've encountered turbulence while listening to this podcast, please refer to our list of resources and services related to PNP Chemsex in the episode description and on chemstories.ca.